Hey guys, it's Sam, and today I'm going to do a trope talk on Between Life and Death. My trope talk series is where I discuss a very specific trope, and they get more or less specific depending on what I really want to talk about, but tropes that I really love, why I love them, what it is I like seeing about them in books, and some books that I recommend that feature those tropes. Now, this particular topic was voted on by my Patreon supporters. Every month my Patreon supporters get to vote in a poll for a video topic that I will do either here on this channel or on my personal channel, which is always linked down below if you want to check that out. So if you want to participate in my content in that way, I will leave my Patreon linked on the screen. So as far as Between Life and Death, this can kind of be broken down into a number of different categories because the specific, very specific trope of Between Life and Death that I love the most, which I will talk about some books that feature this, is a character that usually has a connection to death and travels between life and death. Now, I also have some books that also fit parts of this category, like features a journey between life and death, but not necessarily characters that frequently do that, and also characters that have a connection to death, but don't necessarily go between life and death. So there is some overlap here, but the perfect part of the Venn diagram that's very small is a character that has a connection to death, maybe can control death, death magic, something like that, and then can travel between life and death on a regular basis. If I see something about a character having a connection to death that is not something assassin based, and or characters traveling to death, it's an instant I want to pick that up. I don't really care the rest of what it's about. I need it. If it's hinted in the story as I'm reading it, they're gonna like go to the underworld, I'm like, fuck yeah, buckle in. So the books that are featured within that little part of the Venn diagram, there are only few. The first one being the inspiration for this trope, the first book that ever introduced me to that trope. And it is Sabriel by Garth Nix, but really the entire Abhorsen series. So in this series, an Abhorsen is a person with a magical ability to travel between life and death, and they are basically necromancers. They can control death, and they wear a series of magical bells that do different things. And death is like a river, so it's like a river Styx. There are multiple gates that you can go through, and stuff, like dead stuff that comes from the back gates is real fucked up and very scary, and I love it. So I really enjoy the magic system in here, and the characters and the bells and all the imagery in this. This I read back in high school. I think I read it maybe freshman or sophomore year of high school. Inhale read it, loved the series. The series has since been continued, and I haven't read all the books in it yet because I want to just reread the series. I've reread Sabriel a number of times. I haven't reread Lyriel and Abhorsen, I think, since high school because I didn't connect to those books as much. But now I'm wondering, as I've gotten older, if I will like them more. I still really loved them. They were still, I think, 5 stars, but just I loved Sabriel the most. So I am very interested to just like get back into that series. But character with a connection to death that travels into death. I also love the imagery of this death with the river Styx, you know, me and my Greek mythology underworld bullshit, and that whole thing, like everything about it is like my quintessential perfect between life and death trope. In this category, I also really loved The Archived by Victoria Schwab. I do not love a lot of Victoria Schwab books. This is the first book I ever read by her and adored it. In this book, the main character can travel between life and death. It's kind of like almost like a purgatory type state, but she can still go in there, and in death people are archived almost like books are. It's almost like it's like a ghost, but more of like the story remnants of them, and she has to make sure those things don't escape because that can wreak havoc, and there are parts of the world in which the layer between life and death is very thin. I also really enjoy that. I like the idea that there are almost like transient locations. People talk about this a lot, like the feeling you get being in a travel stop in the middle of the night when you're on a road trip, and it's like eerie feeling, and the idea is that the layers between like reality is thinner there. I love that. That's another trope that I could really go into, but it's not very common. That's a later down the line in this series trope, because I would have a very hard time finding books that feature that, although I do know a few, American Gods being one. Anyway, so this is a between life and death type story with a character that also has abilities that help them control death in a way. And the last one in this category is more an interpretation just based on the complexity and eccentricness of this story, and that is Deathless by Catherine Valente. This is an adult standalone story, and it features Russian and Eastern European folklore and mythology. But in this, the main character falls in love with Koshi the Deathless, which I believe is a version of life. But life and death are very kind of blurry in here, because although he's life, he has more character personality traits of a typical death type character. So that's why this is like kind of a gray zone here, because a lot of her books are kind of a gray zone. But I get the feeling that because they are bonded like this, she almost has control over this life and death type scenario. My books keep wanting to fall off my shelves when I set them like this, so I might need to start finding a different method instead of the backdrop that I've used for years when I talk about books, because they keep taking dives and I don't understand why, because I haven't moved my bookshelves. So help. They started falling again, so I guess I'm just doing this. So like I said, even though this doesn't have the exact same themes as these other two books, I still feel like it gives me the same vibes. So that's why I included it in this category, even though when you talk about it on paper, it doesn't really feel like it fits, but in my heart it fits, you know? Next we have the category of characters that don't necessarily have control over death, but they are taking journeys and traveling between life and death. The first book for this category is The Star-Touched Queen by Roshni Chokshi. This is a Haze and Persephone retelling featuring Indian mythology and folklore. So Hades and Persephone stories are always going to have this element, so I'm not including every Hades and Persephone story that I've read. Also because many of you have been asking if I have a Hades Persephone recommendations list. I don't, because I still don't have a favorite Hades and Persephone story. I promise you that once I do, I will feature a video, but if you keep asking me for it, it's because I don't have a favorite yet. I promise you I will give you that star quality content once I have it. But this does feature, since the main character is kind of going to an underworld type setting, a journey between life and death. Then we have the Wayward Children series by Shauna McGuire. This is a series of books that features children who have at one time gone through a portal. It's a portal fantasy type story, gone through different portals to different worlds. And in the series, there are multiple different worlds that are kind of like the underworld. So a lot of these characters have journeyed between life and death and either stayed there or had to come back in some way. So they are featuring journeys. One of the books, even the third book in the series, yes, the third book, features a journey like through the underworld as well. So there are multiple different underworlds in this story, and that just makes me even more happier, because I'm like, give me all the chthonic worlds. And lastly for this category, which I forgot because I listened to it on audiobook, so I went through all of my read books to make sure that I hadn't forgotten anything, is The Amber Spyglass by Philip Pullman. This is the last book in the Golden Compass, Northern Lights, what is the series name? But that series name from Philip Pullman, which is a very classic children's series. And the characters at one point do have to go to the underworld, and it is wonderful and delicious and kind of creepy, and you're kind of scared for them. But I really definitely enjoyed that part of the book a lot. I think The Amber Spyglass might have been my favorite of all of the books, probably because of that. They do underworld stuff. It's fun. And lastly, we have characters with a connection to death. So some of these characters are preparing bodies for death, or they have death magic, or they can summon death, things like that. I have a lot of books feature necromancer type characters. These are some of my favorites of those, because I don't want to feature every single book that features a necromancer. Also, have you guys noticed there's been a rise of necromancy in books lately? Ah, it's beautiful. So first for this category, we have Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. The main character in this book has Reaper magic, so this is where she can summon like spirits and has a connection to the dead. I did not love this book. I am very cautious about the second book, although I do think I'm going to read it. But the thing I loved about this book is when the Reaper magic was used. Hot damn, give me all of the spirit armies. Then we have Witchwood by Tahada Mafi. This is a book I've recently talked about and done a review for. But this is about a main character who prepares bodies for death and kind of sends them away. She has to wash them. She has a number of things with her magic that is very fantastical, because it's a middle grade story with very purple prose, but it works so well for this. And so she has different magics that she has to do to kind of send the bodies away. And if they don't get sent away, then they will come back kind of as zombies. And she also can see ghosts. So she definitely has a very deep connection to death. Then we have Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. The main character doesn't so much have a connection to death, but one of the antagonists does. She is able to kind of harness souls and keep them as ghosts and can control them. And that is a very interesting thing, because as I was reading this, I was like, I don't like that character, but I love her death magic. And lastly, we have The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. And this is very similar to Deathless in that it's kind of an interpretation of this, but the main character in here is someone that can kind of have a connection to both the magical world. This is based again on Eastern European folklore mythology, so she has a connection to a lot of the like spirits and myths and fairy tales and things like that that are real in this world, but also in reality. But she has a connection, a growing close romantic connection. I haven't read the last book yet, but I'm pretty sure I know what's going to happen, with a character that is basically death. He's kind of I would say like a winter demon. He refers to himself as a demon. He's not, except for devilishly handsome. But they have a connection. So although she doesn't have death magic, maybe she will in the last book, wouldn't that be hype? Although she doesn't have death magic, she has this connection to an embodiment of death in her culture. So that is it for all of the books that I love the most that feature both characters with connections to magic or death magic, or characters that go between life and death, or a mix of both. So comment them below and let me know some of your favorites within this category, especially if you have my Chef's Kiss, Creme de la Creme, both categories. Definitely let me know, because that is my favorite. That is my favorite. Just even thinking about it, I'm like, oh man. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all guys soon. Bye.